It's time for the chip race.
For this week's strategy piece, I managed to get rid of David and got a considerable upgrade in terms of poker expertise to Daiva Byrne, fresh from cashing the World Series main event. And the most talked about hand, definitely, of the World Series this year was a massive hand between Vanessa Selbst and Gaelle Baumann very early on day one. I think Vanessa was actually one of the first people out of the tournament as a result of this hand. And it's been watched a lot on YouTube, so I'm sure most of you are familiar with the details. But for those who are not familiar with the details, it starts with Vanessa opening pocket aces in early position. Gaelle calls with pocket sevens, and one of the blinds, Noah Schwartz, I think, comes along as well with Jack 8 off. The flop comes all clubs with an ace and a 7, so it's basically a set over set situation. Vanessa bets and Gaelle just calls. Noah folds. The turn is another 7, so now Gaelle has quads. Vanessa checks, Gaelle bets, Vanessa raises, and Gaelle just calls. And then the river is essentially a brick. And Vanessa overbets the pot. She bets more than the pot. And Gaelle quickly shoves. And Vanessa goes into the tank and eventually calls off and finds out the bad news that it's a top house against quad situation. So first of all, Daiva, there was a lot of discussion on this afterwards on Twitter, with some people suggesting that maybe Vanessa should have folded the river. And then actually the discussion got a bit heated where there was sort of gender bias to it, and that it was guys suggesting maybe that Vanessa should have folded. So I'm glad I've got you on so that we don't get accused of sexism. What's your view on the hand, particularly the river?
Oh, first of all, thanks for having me on board. Yeah, it's interesting. I think for me, the most interesting point is actually the turn as well. The fact that Vanessa took this line of check raising, it's not standard. I was thinking about it yesterday, and I was thinking, like, by check raising, she really folds out most of the bottom range and drawing hands, like even a flush sometimes, mate flush, I'm thinking. So you're basically, by check raising, you're left with full houses and quads. And when you get shoved on the river, I seriously don't think there is anything else left, just A7 and quads. But I think even A7 is probably not shoving on you, considering how the hand's been played on the turn. So I was interested in watching the interview with Gaelle afterwards, and she said that she wouldn't shove A7 as well on the river. So basically, there are no bluffs when she shoved.
Yeah, when this hand was discussed on Twitter, a lot of really good players, including Neil Farrell, suggested that Vanessa has to call the river. Their argument was there are basically only two hands and they both only have one combination. Pocket sevens, obviously the two remaining sevens make quads, and there's only one possible A7 suited, which could get to the river this way, A7 of hearts specifically. And getting 4-1 on the call roughly, which is what Vanessa gets when she gets shoved on, the feeling was that this means she has to call since it's 50-50 between aces and ace-7 suited. Now, I personally don't agree that it's 50-50 because I think sevens definitely plays this way, but it's not at all sure that ace-7 suited plays this way. There's a couple of points in the hand where it could have been played differently. One point is obviously pre-flop. I played quite a bit with Gaelle. She's actually very solid pre-antes.
From what I've seen online, watching pre-recorded videos and like poker sessions, I think she's very solid. And that's why I don't really think that she's actually shoving A7 on the river. And she even admitted that. So
yeah. So I think there's actually a good chance, first of all, that she might just fold A7 suited pre-flop when Vanessa opens in early position, not wanting to get involved with a really good player with a hand that doesn't flop that well. Like Ace-7 suited is significantly worse than hands like Ace-10 suited or even Ace-5 suited.
Because Vanessa opened VTG, that's another interesting point.
Yeah, so Vanessa's opening from early position, so even though she's pretty loose, her under the gun range is tighter. Then I think the other point where the hand could play differently is on the river. At the time, she told Vanessa that she would have shoved Ace-7 suited because she obviously wants to sympathize with Vanessa and make her feel a bit better. But actually, when she thought about it afterwards, she wouldn't have shoved. The second thing is, even if she did decide to shove, she would have to think about it. And if you review the hand, she actually shoves very quickly on the river. And that's kind of a timing tell. Like when people shove quickly, it's usually one of two things. It's either a bluff and they've just decided before that they're bluffing and they don't have to think about it, or else it's the nuts, which they also don't have to think about. The thing is, I don't think she has any bluffs in this spot. I can't think of any hand she might bluff. I mean, I guess you could make some argument that if she had the king of clubs, so the nut flush blocker, she might. But to be honest, early on in the main event, I don't think she's ever bluffing.
That's my feeling. There are no bluffs because on the turn, what hand she's calling the raise with.
Yeah. So I think when we put it all together, first of all, the fact that Ace-7 suited might have folded pre-flop. So now it's not like it's one or the other. It's like 100% can be pocket sevens, and it's some percentage less than 100% that it could be A7 suited. And then when we think about the way that the river was played, where Gaelle shoved very quickly, I think she'll always do that with pocket sevens because she knows she has the nuts and she doesn't have to think about it. But if she has A7 suited, even if she does shove, and she said afterwards that she wouldn't have, she would actually have to think about it.
Yeah, I agree. She would totally think more about it. It's not a snap shove at this stage of the tournament, considering the chip stacks. There's so much strength in the hand throughout.
Yeah, I mean, the thing is, Vanessa has shown massive strength throughout the entire hand. Think about it. She's raised pre-flop, she's bet the flop, she's check raised the turn, and then she's overbet the river. So it'd be a pretty insane spot to bluff. The final point I'd make is that, like, in a tournament like the main event, your last 16 or 17,000 chips, whatever Vanessa had left, are far more valuable to you than any other chips.
She actually had 20,000 left, which is another interesting point, like her bet sizing on the river. She bets 16,000 into 14,000. And then she still gets shoved on.
Yeah, so Gaelle has also shown massive strength in the hand, and you kind of have to think it's the nuts at that stage.
What do you think about her bet sizing? For me, it was very interesting because I think she could have bet smaller and then just get away. Because I think once she bets like over the pot, she feels like she's committed and getting a good price, like you said, like 50-50 on the call. But if she bets smaller and she shoves.
Yeah, I agree. I think the reason why she does overbet is because she has a very aggro image, and people sometimes will assume when she overbets that it's basically her trying to bully her way to a pot with something like the king of clubs. If she had something like king, queen with just the king of clubs, she'd be blocking the nut flush. It would be a decent hand for her to bluff. So I think she tried to make it look like a bluff with the bet sizing. But yeah, I agree with you that if she had bet smaller and then Gaelle had shoved, she could definitely have folded, because then she's getting a much worse price, obviously. I think, like you said, she felt like she'd committed herself, but I don't think she actually had, because I think if she stood back for 5 or 6 minutes and thought about it, she said in game, well, you could have A7 of hearts, so I have to call. But I think if she'd stepped back, she could have thought, well, okay, maybe it's possible you have A7 of hearts, but there's a lot of clues as to why it's not A7 of hearts.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, it is correct decision to fold at the same time. Probably more majority of the players would have never got away from that hand.
Yeah, I agree. Okay, thanks, Daiva.
Thank you so much. Thanks for keeping me on your poker track.
It was a big pleasure.
Thank you.